All right. Okay, so each of our panelists will first share 5 minutes on their thoughts on the question, what do you think needs to happen to create a healthier Vancouver? And then I'll invite Andre Picard up here to moderate a discussion and help work with the questions from the audience. So first, Trevor, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning. It's always a pleasure to be in gatherings like this. I've been doing Healthy Cities work for 30 years now, and I'd like to congratulate Vancouver on moving to join the worldwide movement of healthy cities and communities. Incidentally, that list that Andre read out earlier from WHO, the one that was all technocratic and gobbledygook, I co-authored it. And I'd have to say I'm still proud of it. That was actually 26 years ago when we started the Healthy Cities work. So, just very quickly, the first thing is, what I want to focus on is this, that I love the summit, it's been wonderful, but one good summit doesn't make a healthy city. And so what I want to focus on is lessons that we've learned in the Healthy City movement from 25 years that really have to do with the business of governance. In a nutshell, you need healthy urban governance. How do you govern a city? How do you make the city, how do you focus on health, and not just really on health, but on people? The notion of human-centered or people-centered development. Bill Clinton had a slogan 20 or more, 30 years ago now, it's the economy stupid. And the response to that is, no, actually, it's the people stupid. And I talk a lot about that. So it needs to be human-centered. It needs to be ecologically sustainable. We have to live within the constraints of the planet. It has to be empowering and participatory, and a lot of what we've heard today is really about many of those things. And it has to be equitable, and we've also heard about that, and I know Paddy Daly's going to talk more about that. But you have to address those inequalities. So let me just talk very briefly about a couple of these things. I think, and I've been saying this for years, if you think about what's the business we're in, why are we in government? What is the business of government? The business of government is not to grow the economy. I would argue it is, to, if you like, to grow people. There was a wonderful phrase that a developer of Columbia, Maryland, back in the 50s gave to his design team in designing Columbia, Maryland. He said, I want you to build me a garden to grow people in. And that's a really interesting image of what a city is or should be, or a community, not just a city. So surely, the central purpose of governance, government and governance, which is a bigger concept, is to improve to maximize the health and the well-being and the quality of life. So it's health in a very broad sense of all the people, and that's the equity piece. And it has to be within the limits of local, regional, and global ecosystems, which is why linking health and sustainability is or should be a no-brainer. I think it requires three things. It requires a vision. It requires, at least in your head, a conceptual model, and you sort of have one up there, which I really quite like. And you need a set of mechanisms, and I want to focus in the end on that. My friend Clem Biesold says that vision is simply values projected into the future. So understand what it is you value and project forward and outward. What would it be like if our city or our community was organized to reflect those values and to live those values? And that's really what, so vision is simply values projected in the future. I talk about a model. This is a model that I developed some years ago and modified a few years ago. But to me, what we're talking about here is how do you build what I call community capital. And community capital has five components to it. Social capital, built capital, financial capital, so human, social, and natural built capital. Human capital is at the center of all this. So the argument is if you get your social capital right, and your built capital right, and your financial capital right, all within the context of natural capital, then you can maximize human capital. Now, I know some people don't like the notion of human capital, but if you think of human capital as simply the combination of all of the potential that each of us possesses as individuals, that's what you want to grow. So real capitalists, and I say this when I talk to the economics world, real capitalists build all 5 forms of capital simultaneously. You're not a real capitalist if you're building economic capital by depleting natural capital or depleting social capital or depleting human capital. And yet too often in our society, that's what we call capitalism. So we need to rethink what we mean by capitalism, and we need to have communities that practice real capitalism. And I hope that that's where Vancouver is going. So, in conclusion, let me just talk, incidentally, let me just go back and say one thing about this, which is, if you look at, for example, the discussion we had around community gardens build all of these forms of capital simultaneously. Good housing does this. Good public transportation does this. And so you can actually take a lot of the things that have been talked about today and think about how do they simultaneously build all 5 forms of capital, and indeed they do. So, and to make all that happen, and I think this is my central message that I'm going to end with, and there is incidentally a handout that you had in your materials that reflects some of this, you need a set of mechanisms and structures. You need, and this is lessons we learned, and actually we learned them fairly early on. I can remember writing this set of 4 items back in about 1990 or so, 1992, at the end of the first 5-year phase of Healthy Cities in Europe, so 91 or 92. You need political commitment. We've seen that today. The mayor is here, and councillors are here. It has to be led by mayor and council if this is going to work. You also need, along with that, community engagement. People have to be engaged. And for example, this is my favorite, most recent example. I was in Belo Horizonte in Brazil recently. They have a deputy mayor for radical democratization. So I look forward to the day when Vancouver has a deputy mayor for radical democratization. You have to have intersectoral action. City government alone doesn't make the city healthy. It has to have all kinds of partners, public sector, private sector, non-profit sector, community sector, academic sector, faith sector, you name it, but they've all got to be there. They've all got to be at the table. Within City Hall, that means you have to have a technical group which brings together all the different departments. It's very interesting. I had a graduate student in Toronto back in the 80s, went and looked at what led to city departments being created in the first place, going back into the minutes for 120 years worth or 150 years worth. A third of city departments were set up with an explicit reference to health as a reason why they were set up. Another third had a sort of implicit commitment to health in there. So health has been a driving force in the evolution of city government, urban planning in particular, I would say, waste management in particular, engineering and so on. So you have to bring those people together within City Hall. You have to have a technical group. And then beyond City Hall, you have to have a leadership group. You have to bring in the civic leadership from all those different sectors that I talked about earlier. And out of that, you can then generate healthy public policy. What's a healthy transportation policy? What's a healthy city food policy? Which is what, for example, the Toronto Food Policy Council is all about. And then you have to have some key structures. And so I guess this is the message I'd leave you with. If you're going to have this continue for years to come, and you'll see in that handout a summary from very recent research looking at phase 4 of the European Healthy Cities project. You need a leadership council, which I've talked about, and you really do need a healthy city office. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. It can be very small, but someone has to bring it together. Someone has to be responsible for carrying this forward, for making these networks, for making these linkages. And so I will leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I'd now like to invite Rami up, Coordinator and Community Developer with PeerNet BC. Welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Feels like I'm on the Sandra Singh show here, which is kind of exciting. I don't have a PowerPoint, so Thank you, everyone, for coming to this session. My name is Romy, and I work with PeerNet BC, which is a nonprofit organization. I also have the privilege of coordinating the Citizen U project with Stephen Dang and Miguel, and some amazing other folks as well. Miguel didn't mention, but this is his second year living in Canada, so it's really amazing to see new immigrants taking such leadership role in our communities. For me, I think that coming into Canada for myself, I came to Canada when I was 9 years old, so my impression of Canada was quite different. Before we left, my mom sat me down and she said, you know, we're going to go to a different country that's going to have people that don't look like you. In a 9-year-old's imagination world, you all had horns. And when I came here, I was like, oh, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. Okay, all right, I can deal with this. But when I did arrive, I was stunned at the beauty of this city. My family landed near, stayed with our family near 57th and Main area. And I was just amazed at the natural beauty of this land. And so amazed that at 9 years old, I started to go for a walk, and I ended up being lost on my first day. Police were called, yes. That was my first introduction to Canada. We've heard things about BC and about how beautiful and amazing it is, and I really want to echo that. But there are some challenges that we do face. We had heard references to Vancouver Foundation's study, and I think it's really important that we really take a look at what that actually means. 1 out of 4 people said that they feel it's hard for them to meet friends. 1 in 3 feel they are lonely. 2/3 did not have friends from another ethnic group. Right? So what needs to happen? For me, from the work that I've been doing, there's 3 things for me that really resonates in my community. And those 3 principles that sort of guide the work that I do are sharing of equal status. The second one being giving and receiving. And the third one is knowledge from experience. So what do I mean when I say those things? Fostering a sharing equal status. Well, to me, that means that we have the ability to find common ground. It means, as we heard earlier, about differentiating between equity and equality. It means that we're providing practical skills such as inclusive group development, community practices, and ability to resolve conflicts within our communities. It also means that as professionals, we have to give ourselves up a little bit. And what I mean by that is that we have to be teaching our communities some of the skills that we've gained through our education so that our communities can take care of themselves as well. When I talk about the fostering the culture of giving and receiving, what I mean by that is a culture of give and take attitude. We benefit as much from helping as receiving, and it means that we participate in each other's cultural celebrations. But it also means we stand side by side with our communities when they suffer tragedies or when they suffer government cuts. And lastly, fostering culture of knowledge from experience. The knowledge and understanding people gain from experience is valuable and different from that gained from study or research. I'm not saying that research isn't important. I think that oftentimes research tells us what human beings are already doing. But it is important that research is there because those who don't believe it can at least have some data to figure out what's really happening. But it is often the people who put research into practice. And what I want to leave you with is one of the other things in Vancouver Foundation study that really made me a little sad just reading about what healthy communities what it does or what it doesn't mean. While many Vancouverites said that immigrants and refugees are welcome in their communities, we went a little bit one step further and said that there are also least desirable neighbors in Vancouver, and they wouldn't want them living in their communities. Those include the Middle Eastern communities, South Asian, and Asian communities. So Vancouver still has a lot more work to do, and I think that of all the groups that we've heard today, they're creating some spaces where these kinds of work, creating a world where we do really want to live in. So I want to thank all of the organizers, but also the people who are working in the programs who are doing such an amazing job in creating a really healthy community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rami. Okay, I'd now like to invite Dr. Patty Daly, Vancouver Coastal Health Chief Medical Health Officer. Thank you.
Can people hear me if I talk from here? Because this is a very comfortable chair and I have no PowerPoint, so I think I'll stay here. First of all, I'd like to start by saying that Vancouver is a very healthy city, and I'll get back to that in a moment. So I think really what we need to do is build on a lot of the strengths that we already have. But just to, first of all, talk about Vancouver Coastal Health for a moment, because we are the organization that delivers all the health services in this region. And in Canada, apart from in Ontario, all delivery of health services is now done by regional health authorities. So even though Andre Picard is concerned about the lack of mission statement from the federal government, we have a mission statement in Vancouver Coastal Health. It's called It's Healthy Lives and Healthy Communities. And what's important about that, it doesn't mention a sickness system, it doesn't mention an acute care hospital. We have goals and we have objectives. And one of our measurable objectives is to reduce the health inequities in the populations we serve. So this is your health authority, which is delivering a wide variety of acute, community, residential care services. That's one of our key objectives. We have a scorecard where we measure our progress and all our goals, and you may be interested to know 2 of the indicators we have on that scorecard. One is the Early Development Index, which is an index which measures readiness to learn for all 5-year-old children starting school in the province. Why would a health authority be interested in that index? It's because we know the importance of early childhood development. And we know that's important to prevent mental illness, addictions, and a host of other problems in the future. We may not be able to influence it as directly as other organizations, but we know it's an important measure of health. One of our other indicators is called the Disparity Life Expectancy Ratio. We are able to look at the life expectancy of geographic areas within the health authority. We call them local health areas. And we want to compare those. Andre Picard talked about differences in life expectancy within very small communities in some urban centers around the world. And we've had that in Vancouver. When I started working in public health in Vancouver 15 years ago, the downtown east side community health area had a life expectancy of only 69 years, which was more than 10 years different than neighboring communities. Now you may be interested to know, because people talk about the downtown east side, that the life expectancy in that community is almost 80 years. It's almost the provincial average, and we've been able to achieve that in a period of only about 15 years. And actually a lot of that change has come through the delivery of health services. It's been through some of the things the city has done. It's been by reducing overdose deaths in that community through Insight and other harm reduction programs. It's been through treating people with HIV/AIDS with our partners at the BC Centre of Excellence in HIV/AIDS and the Urban Health Strategy. And in fact, the lowest life expectancy in our health region is no longer the downtown east side. It's actually in the Central Coast, which is a remote part of the health authority, primarily populated by First Nations communities. And that's the area where we need to start focusing. But what that indicator allows us to do is to measure our progress. And we have been making progress, even in our very disadvantaged communities. Now, just to step back a bit, you've heard a lot about the history of cities, the history of public health. Before we regionalized about 16 years ago, public health was part of the municipal infrastructure. And in Ontario, in the city of Toronto, for example, public health is still part of the city infrastructure. And there's a reason why public health developed along with municipalities, and that's because of what we heard from Andre Picard and others, that in the 19th century, the primary causes of death were infectious diseases. Many of those were related to sanitation. So the improvements in sewage treatment, drinking water, and even housing that was often done by municipalities were some of the most important public health initiatives of that century. We now know, coming to the 21st century, that our most important causes of death are no longer those diseases. They're chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, cancer. And it may not seem as obvious how municipalities can work to address those, but of course we can, and we've heard some of the ways today through things like a healthy built environment, an environment that encourages people to be physically active, a municipality that helps to reduce smoking rates and makes it easy for people to find healthy food. And in these regards, Vancouver is doing extremely well, and this is why I say we're already a healthy city. The province of British Columbia started a Healthy Communities Initiative, and they want municipalities to start looking at initiatives to increase physical activity, healthy eating, reduce smoking rates. We're leading the pack in that regard. And that's not thanks to only to people working in the healthcare system. In fact, I'd give less credit to the work we've done and more credit to what local government has done. So Vancouver already has probably the most walkable city in Canada. And that's because of the great urban planners, the great local governments that we've had over the years, you don't need public health telling you how to do urban planning in Vancouver. You already know how to do it to create a healthy population. We have one of the lowest smoking rates in Canada, and we have probably the best smoking bylaws anywhere in North America. And those bylaws, and research has shown this, have reduced deaths from cardiovascular disease. They've lowered smoking rates. So we're doing great. Food security and healthy eating is an area where we may need to do more, but you've already heard about some of the things that are ongoing that the city, Vancouver Coastal Health, and others are working on. So if we're doing all that so well, what do we need to work on? And that's the question we really have today. Well, I think there's a couple of areas. First of all, and Trevor mentioned I was going to talk about this, health inequities, and many other speakers have already talked about this. Even the mayor talked about this. In fact, he could give my whole presentation, which is one of the great things about Vancouver. It makes my job easy that we have a mayor and council, city government that really gets it. But we can look at indicators of health of this population, and they're very good. That masks the fact that there are populations that don't enjoy the same good health. Health inequities are preventable. They're not health inequalities that occur due to our genetic makeup. There are things that we know that we can address if people have the same opportunities. So we know that people living in poverty suffer ill health. We know that immigrants and refugees, some of those groups don't enjoy the same good health as the rest of the population. Aboriginal people in BC, including our urban Aboriginal population, don't enjoy the same health. Those are the groups where we need to focus. The second thing we need to do that is to have good data, and Andre Picard mentioned this. And we actually have some pretty good data. The Vancouver Coastal Health, in conjunction with all the other large cities in Canada a few years ago, embarked upon a project with the Canadian Institute of Health Information. We divided up our cities into neighborhoods, and we were able to create, using something called a disparity index that was developed by our colleagues in Quebec that measures things like education level, social isolation. We divided up our neighborhoods on that disparity ratio and looked at some health indicators, use of the healthcare system for chronic disease, risk factors for chronic disease. And across every city in Canada, people living in so-called deprived neighborhoods have worse health. They're admitted to our hospitals far more often for chronic disease. They have higher rates of smoking. They're less likely to be physically active and eat healthy foods. So we now have the data that can point to the neighborhoods in Vancouver where we need to focus our efforts. And that's very important because one of the mistakes that we've made in public health over the years and some of the health promotion work we've done is to offer that to the entire population. And many of our messages, of course, get taken up by the people who are already healthier, better educated, have more means at their disposal. And we've been able to increase life expectancy at the high end. We've actually worsened that gap between those living in good health and those living in not so good health. So we have the data. We need to focus on those populations and neighborhoods that we know are a problem. And the final thing I want to say, because we haven't talked about it much yet this morning, is the focus on early childhood development, which, as I mentioned, is something that we are measuring in Vancouver Coastal Health. Why is that important? Well, because we know, and I'm a prevention doctor, so I like to always get back to this, that if we can develop children in early childhood, we're more likely to prevent the increasing number of cases of people living in mental illness, those with addictions, many of the chronic diseases that we face later in life. We need to start thinking of our children as a resource, and this goes back to a bit to Trevor's discussion of human capital. We need to invest in that resource just as we invest in other natural resources in this province. So it's not just those people who have children. This is important for the entire population. If we can focus on early childhood, we will allow our population to achieve their maximum potential. We will prevent many of those chronic illnesses in future, and we'll have a healthier population. So we need to continue all the good work we're doing. Our Greenest City Initiative, we could rename it our Greenest Healthiest City Initiative. It's already doing lots to increase physical activity, to address some of those determinants of health. But if we can focus on those populations that don't enjoy that good health, if we can focus on early childhood, I think we're really going to go far, and we're going to be even greater leaders in BC and Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, I would like to invite Andrew Petter, President of SFU, to say a few words. Thank you.
I'm going to stretch my legs. Well, it's great to be here, and welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to Simon Fraser University's newest facility in our vibrant downtown campus. Sure, you can applaud the diamond. It's interesting, just a few days ago, we were here to announce a new initiative called SFU Public Square, which is an initiative designed to foster public deliberation and engagement on important issues. So how timely and appropriate that I'm back here today inviting this or welcoming this public square to our public square. The question that I guess we were all asked to address is what needs to happen to create a healthier Vancouver? And obviously there are many great answers and many great choices, and many of them, in fact, overlap and intersect. The one I intend to focus on, perhaps not surprisingly, involves the transformative power of education, and particularly of universities. Now, some of you may be aware that SFU has been involved really for the past year and a half in a major community consultation project to try to craft a new vision. And as part of that visioning process, which I think to our collective surprise in the university turned out to be one of the most extensive ever undertaken by a Canadian university, we asked people what is it that they liked about the university and what is it they'd like us to do better. And in addition to hearing from people about how they like the traditional things that universities do in terms of teaching and research, one really strong response we got back was how much people valued and appreciated SFU's community focus, the extent to which we, in numerous ways, engage with the community and are a resource for the community, not just for our students and not just as a traditional ivory tower. And I think that speaks a little bit to the culture and history of this university, but we took it to heart and developed a vision that tried to suggest there's a way in which a university can, in fact, become even more engaged with the community. And so the vision that we developed out of that process, and I'll just quote the vision statement, is to be the leading engaged university defined by its dynamic integration of innovative education, cutting-edge research, and far-reaching community engagement. So that vision is really based on two pretty big ideas. The first is that universities have huge underutilized capacities to contribute to the economic, social, and environmental betterment of the communities they serve, to contribute to that community capital that Trevor talked about, using their human capital, but also all of their assets and resources. And the second and related big idea is that by harnessing these capacities, universities can not only contribute to a more affluent, just, and sustainable society, but they can actually create a richer and more rewarding educational and research environment for their students and their faculty members. In other words, it can be a win-win situation in which the contribution to the community actually enriches the educational and research experience. And if you think about it, and I'm sure you've heard examples today, certainly on the research side we have, but on the learning side too, students who participate in community-based learning gain workplace knowledge, they gain civic understanding, they gain a greater sense of social efficacy, in addition to the academic knowledge, the critical thinking abilities, and the research skills that they acquire in the classroom, in the laboratory, and the library. It can also have a profound impact on students in terms of their educational choices and their career plans. And I'll give you an example in a second. Similarly, faculty members and graduate students who undertake community-based research invariably gain knowledge back from the community and often experience a heightened sense of relevance and gratification in their research endeavors. And I think it can also help to motivate them as citizens to become more engaged with communities. And again, we've seen examples of that not just from Simon Fraser, but from other universities today, of people who are clearly highly mobilized and motivated in their community-based research. So let me just give you two concrete examples of this. One is a student I actually met in this facility about a year ago when he was still a co-op student, a fellow named Wes Reagan. He could be here for all I know. He was at the time a geography student, and he was in the process of completing 2 co-op terms in the downtown east side. One of which was very much involved in the Urban Farm Network project, and the other of which was involved in helping to develop a business improvement association within the downtown east side. Well, he got so turned on by those experiences that he completely changed his view of what he should do as a human being and as a citizen. And it's governed his career choice, and I'm happy to say he recently took on the role of executive coordinator at the Hastings Crossing Business Improvement Association with a real focus on community development. And if you talk to him, invite him to the next conference if he hasn't been invited to this one, he speaks with incredible passion based on the experiential experience he had as a co-op student, which enabled him to gain that additional perspective and energy. Similarly, SFU faculty members like Neil Boyd and Benedict Fisher, whose research on crime and addiction was really important, I think, in making the case for North America's first safe legal injection site in Vancouver, through that experience became mobilized and became very strong advocates, still are today, for drug treatment strategies and criminal justice reform. So those are two areas in which I think an engaged university, by linking students and researchers to communities, can not only add huge value to the health of those communities, but can also enhance the quality of the education and research environment. The key, in my view, is, and this is tough for universities, because the image of universities historically has been elite institutions, the ivory tower. But the key is there has to be a mutuality of respect. There has to be an understanding that this is a relationship that is mutual in benefit as well. And if that happens, I think the environment that it creates for students and faculty can be truly extraordinary. But I don't think an engaged university should draw the line there. There's a lot more that we can do. And I already spoke of the example of SFU Public Square, which is an initiative that will this fall host a community summit in partnership with the Vancouver Foundation to deal with some of those issues that were spoken about earlier around isolation and disconnection and exclusion within our community. That's one way in which a university can harness its resources, its physical and its human resources, to contribute to community deliberation. But I want to leave you with a story that I think shows how, in small but significant ways, if we start to change the relationship between institutions like universities and communities, we can really make a difference. And it's a story that was told to me by Jim Green, the legendary community activist who passed away recently and sadly. But Jim was a real champion of this project, of the Woodwards Project. And he was a particular champion of SFU being part of that project because he saw it as something that would be transformative of the downtown east side in a positive way. And indeed, when we came to this site, we did so with a commitment not just to create a great facility for our students and faculty, but to be a community facility for deliberations like this, for arts and culture, but also to provide programming to the downtown east side. And one of the first things that Jim did when we came here was he said he wanted to take on some of that first community programming. So he organized a lecture series on the arts. It was to be a lecture series. I think it was going to be opera and visual arts and architecture. And it was for the whole community. It was going to take place at the O'Dane Gallery. It did take place at the O'Dane Gallery downstairs. And on the day of the first lecture, which was on opera, after all the advertising had gone out, he thought he'd walk down and check it out and see if the arrangements were okay. And he walked down Hastings Street and came to the entrance on Hastings of the O'Dane Gallery. And there, standing in front of the entrance, was a big security guard. Looked pretty imposing, according to Jim. And Jim said to him, "Do you mind my asking, what are you doing here?" And the security guard said, "Well, I'm here to keep out undesirables." Jim said, "I don't think so." Now, knowing Jim, he didn't say it quite that politely. But he explained to the security guard that, in fact, this was a completely open event, and there were no undesirables. We wanted the community to come in, and the security guard went inside this facility, and the doors were unimpeded, and the community came. And apparently it was a great lecture. I wish I could have been there, but apparently it was well attended by people from throughout the downtown east side and the broader community. And after it was over, a gentleman who clearly had come in from the street decided he wanted to use the washroom facilities inside this building. And so he started to head inside the building, and a student saw him and became concerned and walked over to the same security guard and said to the security guard, "Hey, just a minute, shouldn't you do something about this? This guy's coming in from the street." And the security guard said, "Don't worry, he's from the opera." Now, I love that story because it shows how social transformation takes place in small but significant ways. And if you think about it, there were 3 transformations there. We have the gentleman from the street who suddenly had a facility that wasn't there previously, that was open to him and hopefully open to others within that community as a facility for them. We have a student whose initial preconceptions about that individual were transformed, and we have a security guard who went from seeing it as his role to protect the facility from the community to enable the community to utilize the facility. I think engaged institutions, engaged universities that are prepared to make the transition, to really be welcoming and to partner with communities, can bring about large but also very significant incremental small transformations of that kind. And I just hope that Simon Fraser University can play its part, along with the City of Vancouver and others, in ensuring that those transformations build that healthy community we all want here in Greater Vancouver. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And it's now my pleasure to invite Linda Gray, Executive Director of Urban Native Youth Association, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. I am a member of the Tsimshian Nation, which is about 300 or 400 miles up the coast. So I'm a visitor here on Coast Salish territory. So I hold my hands up and thanks to them for allowing me to live and work and play and learn on their territories. I'm going to start with a little quiz. How many people of you here have ever heard of National Aboriginal History Month? Can I show of hands, please? That's actually pretty good. Usually when I do presentations, maybe 1 in 10 people know that there's been a National Aboriginal History Month here in Canada for the last 4 years. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is at Anya, we send out postings every day in our email and on our Facebook to try to raise awareness about it so that people understand what our unique history and culture and contributions to the growth and maintenance of this country has been and can be once we're more meaningfully engaged. All of the things that everybody talked about today obviously affect Native people in both good and bad ways, but we get affected more negatively by things, especially because we have to also deal with the provincial and the federal government. So things that come along from that thing that often trickles down to what the city has to deal with in terms of social issues, social problems, is something else for us to think about. So it's going to be condensed. I could go on forever. In fact, I wrote a book about it, First Nations 101. So when we think about whenever something happens in this city, whenever something happens to Native people, it's not just happening to Native people, it affects us all. If we do well, the whole country does well. If we're doing poorly, everybody else pays in one way or another, whether it's crime, whether it's social costs, whether it's burdens on the health system. So in First Nations 101, I really tried to talk about, to give people a solid foundation about what our shared history is in this country. So when we talk about treaties, when we talk about health issues, when we talk about the residential school systems, it's not just a Native issue. That affects each and every one of us on a daily basis. If you think about it, if you drill down to what actually has happened in this country and what still happens and what could happen for the better. And when you talk about something that's shared, it's also a shared responsibility for all of us to try to help our community recover from 500 years of externally imposed policies and laws that have led to us facing many, many challenges, social challenges within our families. And on the other hand, many of us are doing well. And for us to recognize that things, when there's meaningful opportunities and we have and actually feel a sense of belonging and relevance in the city and in any other organizations, that it's an open door for us to actually try to take hold of different opportunities in our lives and therefore do better. And when people talk about colonization, and I guess people kind of know what colonization is, but essentially I think of it as when somebody or something comes in and it changes the way people think and it tries to get you to all think in one certain way. And a lot of people think that it's just Native people who need to decolonize our minds so that we can get back to the ways of our ancestors. But in my opinion, we all need to decolonize our minds because the systems that have continue to change the way everybody thinks. You have immigrants who come to our country every day, and they come from rich cultures, they come from extended families, and they come to North America, which teaches people that we are all individuals and that culture doesn't matter so much and that it's all about the nuclear family and that we have to compete for resources rather than share it for the benefit of communities. And of course that the almighty dollar is first and foremost in all the decisions that especially this federal government has been making. And I think all of this stuff keeps us separate and keeps us competing for things and keeps us complacent. We're so busy in our daily lives just trying to survive, and mainstream media convinces us that we're tired all the time. So, you know, buy this to make yourself comfortable and do this and do that. So the conspiracy theorists might think that they're trying to keep us complacent. And I might be one of those people who thinks that, you know, keep us quiet, tell me that I'm so tired at the end of the day that I need to go home and watch TV all day rather than talk to my neighbor and find out what's going on in our community. Because for me, relationships is what it's all about. And the more that we interact with each other, the better. Excuse me. And for First Nations people, if we're the only ones who are advocating or fighting for certain issues, then it makes us feel like distrust for other people and that we don't matter. And it keeps those barriers up, it builds new barriers. So when you think about, you hear in the media about the Musqueam skeletons that have been dug up, well, those are their ancestors, those are our ancestors. When nobody stands up and does anything about that, when people complain because the Musqueam were forced to put up a roadblock on a bridge because nobody would listen to them, and people complain because it's going to take them an extra 15 minutes to get home, people do not understand our reality. And that is something that really needs to change. And the recent funding cuts to the Cultural Connections for Aboriginal Youth program, which is going to close down 14 very, very important programs in this city. I don't know how many people have come up and talked to me about it today, so it's good that people are understanding it. But I've heard mentioned by many people today about the media, and it drives me crazy that you don't hear anything about National Aboriginal Day, which was yesterday. You hear things from clear across the world. And I hear people complain all the time about media and how it doesn't reflect our realities and it keeps us, you know, distracted from what is actually affecting us day to day. And I think about how do we come together as people to change that? Because really we're the consumers, and if we say that it's okay that we're going to hear about Syria and Egypt and everything else for 10 minutes of the news every day, and we don't hear about this important meeting that's happening today, there's something wrong with the media in our community. So I would strongly encourage the city and universities to try to do something about that too. Maybe Citizen U is the perfect place to get people to start working on that. How do we bring about change in that area? One of the things that, from an urban perspective, I'm not sure if people know that about at least 60% of the entire Native community is now in large urban settings. And unfortunately, policy has not followed that. So there's very little funding that's in the urban setting. There's not any consultation or very little consultation with urban leaders. In Vancouver, there's the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Council, which is executive directors from 25 Native organizations who meet monthly, who have tables that bring in other people to help us work on specific issues. And when you have that kind of leadership, and you have the provincial and federal governments completely ignoring us, saying that they don't know who to talk to in the urban setting, that's completely unacceptable. So I ask you all, how do we, as the city or as universities or anywhere else, how do you help to change the way that they do things? It shouldn't just be a First Nations fight, because if we have all of our people living here and we're your neighbors and we're your co-workers and we're the people in your hospitals, then it affects you. And so therefore it's your responsibility to try to help make something different. What MVAC is really trying to work on is trying to make sure that we have meaningful voice, and things like the tripartite health agreement, which has had very, very little, in our opinion, urban consultation in it, especially in Vancouver. I can't speak for the other urban settings, or you have the Assembly of First Nations, or you have BC Leadership Council, which is, it's all land-based First Nations chiefs focused. So it doesn't, and there's little tiny blurbs. It's kind of when you see a youth report and, you know, you'll see a little paragraph on Native people. It's the same thing with Native issues. You'll hear a little blurb on urban. Even though 60% of us are here, it's expected to go up to 70%. And 60% of our community is also under the age of 25. So you hear very little about youth, and there's not much youth inclusion. So I'm just going to zip through things, and you guys could think about how it might affect you and what you might be able to do in those areas. When you think about things like the Ministry for Child and Family Development and Health and schools of social work and education, in Vancouver, they only graduate about 30% of our kids compared to 80-something for non-Native people. And in the child welfare system, about 54% of the kids in the child welfare system are Native kids. And so all of the stats are bad. But what are people doing about it? What kind of influence can we have on schools so that the schools of social work actually, when social workers go through social work, they actually have to take something on Native issues. They don't now. Education, very little. Health, very little. It's absolutely ridiculous that people go unprepared into the community, because it's not if you work with a Native person, it's when you work with a Native person, which will probably be on your first day of work. So I'd like the city and social planners and other people to think about how do you help to change that so that it's actually embedded into the training that people get. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I'll tell you some of the things that I'm inspired by, that I feel hopeful for. Even in the opening, the City of Vancouver has been very good now about acknowledging that they're on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. For those of you who don't know, under 5% of BC is actually treated land, so the rest of the land is still up for negotiations. So it's really important that we acknowledge that, and we treat our elders and our chiefs with just as much respect as the head of a university or the mayor of the city or the premier of the province. So one of the things that the City of Vancouver has been very good at working with us for the development of the Native Youth Centre, which will be at Commercial and Hastings. So they've been very helpful in helping us to work with the province and the feds to try to change things. And the Dialogues Project was a really important initiative to the Vancouver Dialogues Project to help facilitate dialogues between new immigrants and First Nations people, both on reserve and off reserve in Vancouver. That was really good. And Edmonton and Toronto and a few other cities have an Aboriginal Accord, which it's a memorandum of understanding of how you actually work with the community and what your goals are. So we'd love to see one of those in Vancouver. And we'd love to see a city planner that specifically works on urban Aboriginal issues. There used to be one previously, and we talked to the mayor about this the other day, so hopefully there'll be something. One of the things that maybe people can learn from is I'm on the President's Advisory Committee at UBC, and the President comes to every meeting, which is very respectful of him, and he writes notes and he always reports back on everything that we do. So it actually feels like meaningful engagement for our community. Is that he's changing his whole budgeting process so that people don't have to rely on, say, in forestry, that they have to find a grant and it lasts for a year and then there's nothing else about First Nations people in forestry or in social work or in whatever else. Is he's made it's an incremental process, but he's making people build it into their core budget so that it actually goes on. It's sustainable over time. So that really makes me feel hopeful that things can change within that university, and I hope that other universities will do the same in colleges. So hopefully maybe the City of Vancouver can do that too. They could put it into their core budget so that things like the dialogue projects and work with the Native community can be an ongoing thing that can benefit us all. I already talked about MVAC and the Aboriginal Focus School. The school board partnered with MVAC, and we formed an Aboriginal caucus, which has led to the development of an Aboriginal Focus School, which will open this September for kindergarten to grade 3 at McDonald Elementary at Hastings and Victoria. So I'm really happy about that. So these are the kind of initiatives that we think can make meaningful change for our kids, because if you can get our kids having good numeracy and literacy and a sense of self and a sense of belonging and pride, by the time they get to grade 4, they're going to do well in school, which everybody knows what education could do for individuals. So that's one of the big things that we've been working on. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be coming will be coming here next year to do one of their 7 national events in September of next year. We're hoping to get out 50,000 people to do a march to say that we think it matters, that this has happened to 8 generations of people that were forced into the residential schools, and that we support them in their recovery, and that we think it matters that the intergenerational effects are still happening and people need to do things differently. So I invite you all to attend the things. It's either going to be at BC Place or the Pacific Coliseum, and it's going to be a free event that we want everybody to come to. And if you can participate in the march, would be fantastic. And the one thing that really, really inspires me is every day I see Native youth who come to our location at Commercial and Hastings and say that they feel like it's their home. It's their home away from home. They are making positive choices in their lives, and that is a result of meaningful opportunities, culturally relevant programs, and people who are just willing to listen to them and to take the time to notice that they have great potential and that if they're given meaningful opportunities, they can do fantastic. If anybody wants to learn about my book, go to www.firstnations101.com. It's sold all over the city, and in another 300 books, it'll be a bestseller. So.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you. Well, I was all of the speakers' comments were so interesting that that rather than keep it to the 5 minutes, I decided to let it go, and so we're going to shorten the question period that we have now. But what I'd like to just clarify a couple of things. One is that what we're going to do is give Andre questions that are very specifically addressed to the panel, and then a lot of questions have come in that are very general questions around the strategy in general, and so we'll take those into account as the committee moves forward. So everything will be looked at, everything will be addressed. For our 10 minutes that we're going to spend in discussion now, though, we'll focus on the questions that are really specifically directed toward panel members. So with that, I'd like to invite Andre back up on the stage.
Great. So lots of great questions, but very little time. So I'm going to try and make very specific questions. I want to start with Romy. There's a few questions. I've blended them into one question, which is, in this multicultural city, there's diverse health needs and priorities. So how do you ensure those voices are heard, and especially the voices of non-English speakers in forming the strategy?
Oh, that's a pretty tough question.
They're all going to be tough questions.
Yeah, no kidding. I think that there are already key folks already in positions of power, whether it's in schools or in community settings, settlement workers. And for the most part, I think that those are people who can... there we go. Those are the folks, I think, who can are the gatekeepers of that kind of spaces. In one case, we worked with a community in Abbotsford, particularly looking around domestic abuse and how do we challenge those notions in certain ethnocultural communities. And part of that was around how do we well equip some of the South Asian communities in talking about these kinds of issues in a safe and supportive environment, which meant that we had to provide them with the skills on how to do that. So it was about training others to do that kind of work. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about immigrant and refugees' health, it becomes really important that we are looking at our governments as well and what are they providing. And the recent cuts to refugee healthcare is astonishing. It blows my mind that we are universal healthcare in Canada and we are taking away the rights of healthcare for refugees. And unfortunately, it's not the refugees who are going to be protesting because they're in fear of being deported. My question to you is, where are the Canadians who are supposed to be protesting and supposed to be championing for universal health care? Right.
Okay, so it's everybody's role. Great. So it's everybody's role, but groups like yours are going to be on them like a dirty shirt to make sure they do it. Okay, good. Patty, very specific question. A lot of interest in your stats, especially the various life expectancies by neighborhood. People want to know where can they access this information? Where can they get more information on the disparity index?
Well, we're about to post our balanced scorecard and make it public for people to see. And the other thing that we're working on in Vancouver Coastal Health, and we have a public health surveillance unit that's done some very good work, is developing profiles of all of our local health areas that we'll have. And we've actually published the one from the downtown east side, and this was reported by the province a couple of years back. That will all become available on our website. So we're starting to get better about making that data available. We haven't been great in the past, and we also need to share it with people like the City of Vancouver to help in planning. I should also say that much of the information comes from readily available sources of data like BC Stats. Some of the data that you quoted, Andre, comes from the Canada Community Health Survey. People can have access to that on the website. But I did want to mention, because I didn't mention it before, that in terms of data, we know that we have to do a better job in monitoring the health of our population. And one thing that we're going to be launching next year across Vancouver Coastal Health is something as a survey called My Health, My Community that will do a better job than the Canada Community Health Survey, which is a random survey of the population that looks at things like physical activity, weights, how many fruits and vegetables do you eat. But unfortunately, the numbers in that survey are very small, and we can't look at neighborhood level data. So My Health, My Community will be an opportunity to engage people across Vancouver Coastal Health and to ask a series of questions about health, about risk factors for disease and illness, and community connectiveness, and many other things. So I encourage you to watch for that. And as part of that, when you engage in that, you will get more information about the kind of data that I talked about. But yes, we do need to make that data more readily available, and we're working on that, and it will be coming to you soon through our website.
Great. Thanks. And so I'm going to try and squeeze in one quick question for everyone if I can, if we do 1 minute answers. So your biggest challenge, Trevor, is going to be answer this question in a minute or less. You've been at this for 3 decades. Are we making any progress? And don't use any bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo language.
In a word, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what a WHO report should read like.
I think the most important progress we've made is that this idea, which started with really just some thinking and talking in Toronto in the early 80s and then in Europe, is now a worldwide, a global movement. And what we've done in part is to put health and cities back together in a way that they've gotten separated in the 20th century, and particularly around urban planning. And if you go, for example, now to the Canadian Institute of Planners, to their website, they've got resource pages and tools and all kinds of things about healthy urban planning. It's on the global agenda. It's on the agenda of cities and towns and villages. It's not just about cities. In Canada, we actually call it healthy communities, and we do so for a very specific reason. A lot of places are not cities. So we chose to call it healthy communities. There are provincial networks in Quebec and Ontario and BC, some of which have been going for 20 years or more. So it's a long, slow process. And I always used to say, you know, is it a success? Yes, because of that. But the other answer is come back in 50 years or even 100 years, because we're talking about a long, slow process of change. Sanitation came in 15 years, but it actually the work on that really started in the 1840s, and it didn't really blossom until the 1870s, and the impact wasn't really felt until the 1900s. So we need to understand that when you do this work, it is not a shot in the dark. It's not a quick fix. It's a long, slow fix, but it's a much better fix.
And Linda, I didn't skip over you. I wanted to save your question because it flows from the larger one I asked for Trevor. There's been a lot of talk about the Aboriginal community needs specific measures, needs extra help. In your talk, you also said you want that, but how do you balance that with giving this extra help, this extra push, and not vilifying the community, make it look like, oh, here's the problem, et cetera? How do you balance that in a strategy?
Well, is this on? I don't know if it's on.
Yeah.
There it goes. Can you hear it?
Yep.
Okay. I can't hear it. Well, Anya, we're a really prevention-focused organization. And what I was just thinking about what your answer is, and I think there has been meaningful change for the Native community over the last 10 to 15 years. And a lot of that hasn't necessarily had to do with the health authorities. It has to do with the truth starting to come out about the residential school experience. So when you have an entire people who have this big dark secret and nobody knows about it and nobody believes that it happens,
that once that came out, that made a significant difference. And because we've started to reclaim our culture, that has been such a huge difference, and that's why I call it culture as therapy. So I think the biggest bang for anybody's buck is to let the Native community lead the way. If we say that culture is important and we see the change that it's made in people's lives, then believe us. And really, urban people need to be heard on all issues, and we need to be consulted, and we need to be able to tell what our community wants and to help fulfill those needs. I don't think that our community is worried about, people already have such stereotypes about us. If we say that, well, you know, some of us are alcoholics, some of us are overweight, or some of us have health, you know, whatever health issue, it's not going to make it any worse than it already is. So I just wouldn't worry about it.
So a plea for self-empowerment, very, very good.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, Andrew, I want to ask you, because you're the opera guy today, how do we ensure that arts are part of the Healthy City strategy? A couple of people have noted we haven't heard a lot about the arts and culture. How do we do that? Again, in a minute.
Well, I mean, this facility, I guess, kind of speaks from a university perspective how universities can do that. I mean, arts is such a wonderful point of both connection and enrichment for a community. I can't imagine it excluding the arts. But I'll give you the example from the public square. This public square initiative, we thought long and hard, how do we make it inclusive, and how do we use the arts as part of that? So if you go to the public square website, which I encourage you all to do, you'll find there's poetry readings. At the summit, we're going to have a film festival. We're going to have opportunities for community organizations to put on displays, some of which I hope will be cultural and artistic. So my view is it's making sure that we include into the fabric of all of the community activities we do the power and the enlightenment that comes with culture and the arts.
So we have many more questions, and we're going to leave you to
Can I just have one very quick
20
point?
seconds.
Yeah, less than that. There is a new national organization called Arts and Health Network Canada. And so just Google it, and it's about exactly those sorts of things. What's the links between arts and health? It's a very important issue.
Great. So many great questions we have here that I can't ask. We don't have time, but have the dialogue outside. And please join me in thanking Romy, Patricia, Linda, Trevor, and Andrew. Thank you.